Hi, I'm Watson, and this is my YouTube channel, Cryptic Creations. And this is my 95th video today. And what we want to talk about today is Terence McKenna and the Transcendental Object at the end of time, which we're turning into just the acronym Tau-Tiat. Tau-Tiat. Now, that being said, the prerequisites for this video are an assumed knowledge of Terence McKenna and his lectures on novelty and Novelty Wave theory as well. And also, preferably, my video, The Singularity is Not Near, which is a hour-long, approximately, very well thought out and very well presented argument to the contrary of it's called The Singularity is Not Near, by the way, and the link will be in the description. If you haven't seen it, it's a great video to really dive into the subject, and I highly recommend watching it. But in it, or rather, stepping back again, we have the situation where prophetic speakers such as McKenna have brought forth an idea that has truth to it, but I don't feel that it was true enough. And in fact, he even quotes Wittgenstein in one of his lectures. The title of it escapes me. It might be the one on taxonomy of illusion, but don't quote me on that. But he says that Wittgenstein said to his students that is that true? But is that true? He said, oh, well, it's true enough, and true enough is a good thing to put out there, like it's saying that we're not thinking that we're 100% right, but we're onto something. But where I feel Terence needs to be defended from attacks in the scientific community at large is because of his idea that time wave zero was fast approaching, and it made him seem kooky. But it was just his personal, I believe that his personal hopes to see something like this spectacular happen in his lifetime heavily influenced his belief that his assumptions really about the nature of reality, which is what this talk is really about. In other words, or not in other words, but pushing forward, he makes the assumption, he seems to make the assumption that, and really you have to make this assumption, that the universe is infinitely complex in order to support this exponential growth curvature. Now, and what that means is that you just always are going towards the towards Tau-Tiat, but you never come in for a landing, right? Because on an exponential curve, no matter how far out you go on positive x, you're still increasing along y. You're still gaining. And so he really had to find peace with what he believed, which was that, what it means to transcend is to fly off into infinity forever. Whereas, if you, okay, so this is where it gets scientific, and I really want to call upon my strength to speak with the clarity, decisiveness, and the assertiveness to explain this the way that it needs to be explained and articulated, so that people can really quickly gather what I'm saying and take it and have it be the next step in the conversation. Because as of now, we're waiting for someone like me, or probably someone with a better ability to speak publicly. I get really nervous talking in front of a camera. That's like one of the main things that I struggle with. But I'm just trying to push myself through it and to articulate things the way they need to be said, the way that I can talk to my friends and family, like in a very loving, open, and non-rushed way, but in such a way that you really get out a lot of points in rapid succession, like a truly organically growing conversation. Whereas whenever you record something, you have to do it where you pretend that you're not. In order to do it authentically, you have to let go of the fact that you're being recorded and scrutinized. It's tough. It's really tough. But where I differ with McKenna and where I want to push the conversation forward is in allowing, or provided that, rather, to back up a step, provided that nature is only finitely complex, then we can approach the eschaton at the end of time, or at infinite time. That's just the ideal plot. If time stops, or if the universe has an ending stage, then obviously there's a cutoff point. But then, in order to grow towards something and have it be meaningful, because here's where there's a disconnect in the old school logic of eschatology, of novelty theory. It's this non-realization that you can't have an exponential curvature and an infinitely complex universe and approach the transcendental object at the end of time. You would just never get there. It's infinitely complex, and no matter how novel life becomes, it's always in the distance. Don't you see that makes it disconnected, essentially. It makes it so that you can never approach God. And that's another thing that I kind of disagree with McKenna on. He talked about God at the end of time a little bit, but he tried to make it more mathematical. But I want to be even more broad, to be able to use terms like God and hard science and mathematical terms and really do a Cinderella shoe slipper and put hope that it fits, that but it's this idea to broadly to increase the generalization here. What I'm suggesting is that whereas McKenna talked about the transcendental object at the end of time being orthogonal to evolutionary development, which means that it's you're going in this direction, but then you evolve to a certain point and the mind wakes up and all of a sudden gets this hit in its visual field, but it's in another direction. And he has a lecture called Alien Love, which is about how this thing, and this is part of his beauty, his ability to beautifully and really make it accessible and really articulate what this thing is about. I call it, at an very early stage, before I even heard of Terence McKenna, I was talking about the mental pregnancy, and I saw that there was this conception of God in the mind that had to be birthed. And so, but again, we need constraints on the system in order to have an eschatological event take place. You can have a birthing along here, but this is deceptive, because the exponential plot, that is, because you can never have a birthing procedure. It's just infinite pregnancy. But here you can have the birth at infinity, and you can just talk about, it cuts off, and if it cuts, or it goes on to infinity, and you just have to breach infinity. But it could be the case that we have to breach infinity, and it has a cutoff point. And if it has a cutoff point, we can talk about contingency and alternate outcomes, because another thing that McKenna, I don't think, really adequately considered was that it doesn't have to be a thing that's like a force upon us. It can be an influence, but something that doesn't necessarily have to come about. It could be, like it's there and it doesn't need us. If we don't evolve towards it in this timeline, there's still other timelines where it has manifested, or other universes along the sea of chaos, because I actually believe that the multiverse is along a plane, and you have the sea where universes are like waves on the ocean. And whenever you allow, and it's interesting too, because whenever you allow that time is two-dimensional, it lets you put all of the different futures on a plane. So you have like this lightning strike going across from a single point. That's at the Big Bang. And then at the tips, at the end, because we're assuming, and that's an implicit assumption, because we're moving towards, or explicit, because now, because we're moving towards thermodynamic equilibrium. And the struggle is order versus chaos. And life is the order, and life is this implicit thing. Like consciousness is in all matter and energy. But we don't necessarily have to get to the highest level of development in order for the highest level of development to already exist. Like that's the mind fuck. Like God, or like the perfect being that everything comes from, that you sense on these high doses of psychedelics, the true spiritual experience that wakes you up to that thing that's pulling us towards it, but there's free will involved. Like, it's not just something that's acting on us. We're flowing back into it, and we don't have to achieve it if we don't do what we have to do, which is bring this thing back into a logical, understandable perspective. And yes, McKenna is currently being dismissed by the scientific community, and I'm actually calling for like a raising of awareness of this subject, because he gets discredited because he kept pointing to the end of time at December 21st, 2012, and that didn't happen. But in the logistic model with the growth constraints, the compound growth constraints, you just hit the inflection point. And if we're able to model this growth with my function, my procedure, where I take the key events in time and make a zigzag, if the event, with a very simple path rule, such that if the key events aren't continuing to get closer and closer together, then the curve, as it were, lifts back up. And so you would have the lowest point. That lowest point would correspond to the inflection point in the not discrete but continuous logistic function. And so that's what we would be looking for. We want to open this conversation up again to the fact that we need to really have a good working and variable definition of what a key event means, of what a key event is, and be able to plot them over time to determine if things are going exponentially or not. And again, this is like where it becomes, hold on, we're going to need to do a part 2 on this. Stick around for part 2. It's going to have the same video title with just part 2.